Has Twin Peaks become part of the identity of Snoqualmie and North Bend? Yes. And I believe so, just because of, anecdotally, you talk to people, and particularly Rachel or Max, the owners of Tweets, the cafe, and they will say how people come in from all over. And the fact when David Lynch passed, they had this huge memorial, people just leaving cans of Coke and cookies and logs and blue roses and so forth out there. People felt this sense of the place where David was, or was in David's imagination, Mark Frost's imagination. This was a place, right? This is a physical space where you can step into and you see the mountain and you see the places that appear like they are in the show for the most part. I mean, they've evolved over time.
The Snoqualmie tribe has lived here since time immemorial. As soon as the Ice Age glaciers retreated enough for archaeological sites to exist, there's evidence of the Snoqualmie tribe being here. The Snoqualmie were unique in that they were in an area of the lowest Cascade Pass in Washington state, and the Snoqualmie Falls kept the upper valley separate from all of the normal salmon drainages. So there's a unique history, unlike some of the other valleys as far as settlement patterns. Once European Americans came to the area, the Snoqualmie Valley was settled about a generation later. And I think part of that was the Snoqualmie tribe intentionally not showing the way to the lowest Cascade Pass, because Snoqualmie Falls was a sacred site. And also it was more challenging for European Americans to farm in this area because there wasn't a direct route to the Puget Sound. You had to go from Falls City out to Snohomish and Everett and then switch ships to get anything to market. So it just didn't make economical sense. So we don't get settled here until after treaty signing. The Treaty of Point Elliott was signed in 1855, and it created a government-to-government relationship between the Snoqualmie tribe and other regional tribes with the U.S. government. In exchange for their lands, the government made promises. And so settlers didn't come into the area until after that, which is different than in a lot of the other areas of our region. And up until 1889, there were only about 100 settlers here for the whole Snoqualmie Valley, because of how challenging it was to actually get goods to market and make a living here in the European system of doing things. It was a great place for the Snoqualmie tribe and Coast Salish peoples. The Snoqualmie tribe had thrived here and were known for being able to do cross-cascade trade, and had become one of the most powerful tribes in the region by the time of settlement because of the valley, but settlers didn't have those same advantages. Once the railroad arrived in 1889, then the population boomed. So the census in 1889 has the population of settlers at 100-ish. By 1891, it's grown to over 1,200. So that's really when the settlement really gained speed here in the valley. That same year as the arrival of the railroad in 1889, Snoqualmie and North Bend are both platted, and statehood happens. And then Carnation and Duval in the lower valley don't get platted until the Milwaukee Railroad arrives in the early 1910s. So you see a different settlement pattern down in the lower valley. And they relied on steamship transportation for a lot longer than we do in the upper valley. The logging started here in the 1870s, and it was the major industry until the 1990s. And North Bend has been different than the other valley towns in that it's the last stopping place before you go over Snoqualmie Pass. And so it had a huge amount of interstate travel commerce come through. So in 1949, there's a Seattle Times article talking about North Bend, and it says that even though it only has 499 residents, it on average has 5,000 visitors a day coming through because of the interstate traffic. And up until the 1970s, the highway went directly through downtown North Bend. They're on North Bend Way. So they had a much different economy than the rest of the valley did. And it was very much focused around that travel. So there were nearly a dozen gas stations, nearly a dozen hotels, probably 24 restaurants, all serving that customer base, whereas the other valley towns didn't have that same focus. The other challenge that had happened by the time of Twin Peaks filming was in 1978, the new I-90 opened, and so it bypassed North Bend. And so North Bend was going through an economic slump because it lost all of that traffic coming directly through town. And then the Snoqualmie was dealing with the mill starting to wind down. Snoqualmie was still a fairly sleepy town. The mill was starting the process of winding down. It would end up closing in the 1990s, and it had been the major employer since 1917, 1918. So right after Twin Peaks was filmed, we had a real economic hardship period. I remember growing up in the valley, and there was a lot of alcoholism and substance abuse going on in the downtown area. Looking back as an adult, I recognize some of those signs of alcoholism and substance abuse. I also remember seeing a lot of adult literacy programs because they knew the mill was winding down. And because it had been an employer for generations and you didn't need to know how to read and write for a lot of the jobs, a lot of people had dropped out of school early. And so there was a huge amount of the community that needed literacy programs and job retraining. So that was going on in the background. And when the mill closed, of course, that left a lot of without employment. And that ended up many leaving the area. In the 1990s, when I went to Mount Si High School, I think something like 20% of my graduating class ended up joining the military because that was one of the few options a lot of the students had for gaining further education in life. So I think that valley experience is very different than what people experience today.
You know, in the early days, right, the 1992 Twin Peaks Fan Fest, right, the Twin Peaks Festival was a huge draw because, again, you had stars from the film. David Lynch was here. You know, it was, you know, drawing people in here. And then it kind of evolved and morphed into more of this kind of local celebrity. A lot of celebrities attended over the years. People would come out. A small group of folks would gather together pretty regularly from these. I've talked to people that have been to them. They've shared pictures with me and seeing this. I'm kicking myself I didn't come out to them like I did. But as time has passed, right? And so as that 25 years went on and then they came back and filmed in The Return, so much had happened in the valley during that time. You know, you're at the tail end of the lumber industry, which was such an important part in Snoqualmie Valley. But Weyerhaeuser sawmill, the Snoqualmie mill shut down, you know, in the early 90s. that whole business, kind of just went away. And what does it get replaced with? Eventually it comes with tech, right? So there's a big tech hub in Seattle, but then you have this other rejuvenation of a small town. And how do you drive people to a small town? How do you get people out here? So this fan festival kind of then went away, and then there became this Twin Peaks Day celebration. And honestly, much to the credit of people who were living here at the time, Mary Hutter, Carl Reinsch, they wanted to do some type of celebration around the town of where these things were, right? That clearly there's tourism. Since the early days when the show first aired, people always want to know, where is this real place? Where's the waterfall? Where can I go, have cherry pie? And it drove a tremendous amount of tourism out to the area. Not only tourism throughout the United States, but globally around the world. The Grain Line tours of Seattle had tours running out here, a 4-hour tour you could take from Seattle on a bus and go visit some locations, end up at Tweeds, have pie, do that sort of thing. So clearly that tourism piece had always been here and people had kind of did. But I think without the show being on anymore, just distance and time kind of, went away. And so you had this like small fan fest that was doing its own thing. And then you have this kind of resurgence in Twin Peaks Day because Twin Peaks Return aired. They came here and shot a lot in the valley from in September and October of 2015. And so this became a whole new interest. Obviously, the buzz is back. There's 25 years later, we're having this. And by that time now, here you have a town where it's already had people coming here for years. You can see that just in the sales of pie at Tweeds Cafe and just other anecdotal evidence, right? That you hear people visiting Dirtfish Rally School, or you see people, going into the town. They knew that there was something here, right? So Twin Peaks Day comes about in 2018. And this is a way to acknowledge the day that Agent Cooper arrives in the fictional town. He says February 24th, right, from that. From a business perspective, February is not prime season in Snoqualmie Valley. It's cold, it's snowy. It's a way now to drive tourism during a time that's connected to a show, in a moment in time in a show, but also be able to drive something, business-wise. And it has been amazing to see the evolution of it, going from a Twin Peaks Day to then what we now have is the real Twin Peaks, this fan event that celebrates the towns in which David Lynch and Mark Frost filmed this show. And I think it has become such a fabric of this community. To walk down the street and see businesses with signs and windows or doing specials like Falling River Meats does a whole brie and baguette sandwich, which I buy every time I come out to this thing, and I just eat it throughout as I'm between events and such. Or Volition Brewing doing the Golden Shovel, which is a nod to Dr. Amp from Twin Peaks Return. Dirtfish selling a pin set, just like the merchandise shops are doing. To me, it's clearly an embrace of, they recognize the fans, they recognize people come from all over. And that has been really great to see, that evolution of a small fan event that was about celebrities and so forth to really a celebration of what makes this community great.
For a while, I did not really know what Twin Peaks was for a while, but I became aware of it really when I see a bunch of people taking pictures with the cafe sign over at the Tweeds Cafe, and just kind of like, why is everybody always taking pictures with that? And the answer was Twin Peaks.
I've been a Twin Peaks fan for about 15 years. I started coming up to the Snoqualmie Valley to go to the Twin Peaks Festival in 2013, and I've visited the area on average once or twice a year ever since. I made a bunch of friends at these fan events, and it's as much a family reunion at this point as it is a celebration of a TV show.
I do remember I got a phone call from, back then it was the executive director of the Snow Valley Chamber. It was kind of dark out, and she's like, oh, we can go see some of the behind the scenes. And so it was when they were filming at Smokey Joe's, and so we couldn't obviously go in, and it was kind of top secret, but we got to see kind of behind and park over by the trailers that were set up over by Sahara Pizza. So that was my thing, and that was about it. saw a couple people walking around. And so it was just still kind of like, oh, this is neat. There's something being filmed. And I guess we'll watch it when it comes out.
I now have been out here 10 times since that trip in September 2019. And I think some of it is because in 2018, I had launched Twin Peaks Blog, a fan site that was just documenting my experience with the show. And a big part of that was then the film locations, the places where the series was shot, the movie was shot, and so much of it did take place here. Twin Peaks: The Return had finished airing. I had found a lot of those locations. I just needed a centralized place to do that. And since that time, I've just dug deeper and deeper into such a rich history about Snoqualmie Valley and the places that are real places that people live and eat and shop and drive by every day, that are in a show, but are real living places with a lot of history to it.
I first watched Twin Peaks in about 2010. I had a coworker who introduced me to Mulholland Drive and Blue Velvet, and I worked at a record store at the time that sold movies, and so I went into work and special ordered everything David Lynch had ever done. So I bought the Twin Peaks Gold box set sight unseen and immediately fell in love with it. I introduced other friends to it. A buddy of mine got into it shortly after I did, and we decided to drive up the coast to the Twin Peaks Festival, which was about 13 hours north of us. And at the time we were broke, so we could either afford the trip here or we could afford a hotel room. So we drove up and set up a tent in the dark in the forest and opened the tent flap in the morning and found that Twin Peaks is a real place. And just to see the fog rolling through the mountains and the trees, it's sort of shocking how true that comes across on screen. There have been fan events in the Snoqualmie Valley since the very beginning, back in the 90s. I think it's always been a source of tourism and attention for the valley. In recent years, since the Real Twin Peaks has been the annual event here, we've prioritized collaborating between the fan community and the local community. So it's been really cool to see the local businesses lean into it, whereas it used to feel a little bit like we were encroaching on somebody's territory. Now it feels more like we're meeting somewhere in the middle and making sure, you know, in addition to fans having a good time, the local community enjoys having us and gets something out of it too.
In my real experience with the world of Twin Peaks and the fans of the show and everything was probably working our first Twin Peaks events here at the theater. And that might have been when we had Kyle MacLachlan come out. He was in the area and he was kind enough to drop by, and we were able to get his handprints in concrete for our brand new Twin Peaks Walk of Fame at the time. And that was just so killer. And it was so great to meet him and talk with him. And also that was when our first experience here at the theater, having the fans all come out here. And it was great just to meet those people. And something interesting about them related to the theater specifically is that they're one of the cleanest groups. There's not a whole lot of popcorn, not a whole lot of spills or something. It's just something about them. They're just very clean, and it's awesome.
In my experience, the fans have been very open and artistic and vulnerable and generous. Pretty much everything you could hope for in a community. I guess when something's based on a piece of art that is tackling sensitive subject matter, you can generally count on the people who are drawn to that to be good people. And I've found that to be true of Twin Peaks fans. I know the filming locations are a big draw to people, but in my experience, when I started coming up here for fan events, I didn't know what to expect. I was just along for the ride, and it's like stepping through the TV screen when you arrive in the Snoqualmie Valley. So I think anything beyond that feels like a bonus.
I think Twin Peaks has 100% become a part of the identity of the Snoqualmie Valley here. I mean, how could you not? I mean, so much of our tourism is because of Twin Peaks. And I know as a business owner, I want to lean into that because tourism brings people into our town. It stimulates our economy. That's fantastic. So why would we not do that? Why would we not fully embrace that as part of our identity? And also, it's just fun. I mean, it's a cool thing to have. It's a cool claim to fame. When I meet people, outside of town, I'll say, "Oh yeah, I'm from North Bend." Like, "Oh, let's kind of, was that near Seattle?" Like, I'm like, "Yeah, it's the town where Twin Peaks is filmed." They go, "Oh," and everybody, that clicks for everybody. So that's how I see it. But yeah, it's definitely become part of the identity. I mean, we have the cafe. We have the theater with our Walk of Fame. I mean, right there, we've literally built Twin Peaks into the sidewalk of North Bend. So it's definitely part of us here.
I think it has brought in a lot of tourism over the years, and I think it's interested fans of the show who then get interested in our community and want to learn more, and then become community members and supporters of things like the museum. Two of our most recent donors are Twin Peaks fans, and the Twin Peaks fandom community is amazing. They want to support the community that their favorite show was set in, and they're a warm, welcoming community. And I think that's been very positive.
A few specific economic impacts. For example, in February, it's a very, very slow. It's the shoulder time for businesses, especially small businesses. So, for example, people stayed at the Snoqualmie Inn on Snoqualmie Ridge, and that helped make their month, or else they would have been in the red. So it's very helpful, there's quite a few Airbnbs and Verbos around town. So people being able to actually recoup from the very slow times is huge.
The Snow Valley Regional Chamber of Commerce put out an estimate saying it was $12.5 million of economic impact that tourism and this brings. It's interesting. I think it could be even more, over time, if you look at that. But clearly there's an impact in some way. In summertime, you probably don't need the tourism because it's a busy place, right? Snoqualmie River, there's people just enjoying the beautiful sunny weather. But I think at times where it's winter and times like this, I think it's a great draw. And I'm glad that the businesses in the towns have recognized that these fans exist. They're going to be here regardless because, again, the show still exists and there's a new audience that is discovering it. I think unlike the days of VHS cassettes and Bravo television reruns, having it accessible via streaming services and having a whole new generation that is discovering the mystery of this kind of nostalgia of the 90s, the lives that, a younger generation has never lived, but they look back at this time and it may have been like me in the 80s looking back at the 1950s, right? It's the same kind of concept. And so they're looking back at that early 90s time period where grunge was coming on the scene in Seattle, and there was it's just, again, there was a different vibe, and I think that will just continue to infuse newness.
I think Twin Peaks is an important part of Snoqualmie and North Bend's histories. I wouldn't say it's the most important part, but it's a ticket in for a lot of people. So it's a place that I saw on TV, and coming here because of a TV show has introduced me to a real place with a real community, which I've found to be equally as comfortable and welcoming.
It's Michael Horse who played Deputy Hawk, and when they were doing the press for Twin Peaks: The Return, they focused on one of the videos they shot. He talked about this place being a character in the show, and how much of it, you have all the iconic characters, but really there's just something special about this town, the towns here and the place that you can step into and feel like you're immersed in this world.
Everything's always changing. So even, year to year, locations look different than they did the last time. There are a few places in the valley that feel especially like that line of reality is blurred a little bit. Tweets Cafe being one of them. Rachel and Max, the owners, have put a lot of love into the business since they took over in, I think, early 2020, which is obviously a difficult time for people to take over a business and keep it afloat. But since they took over the cafe, they've gone out of their way to put little Twin Peaks nods in. The back wall they painted to look like it did in the show. They put this vintage Coke refrigerator that's very much kind of like a throwback to the 50s, in the same spirit of the diner as it appears on screen. They've got little props and nods to the show, and it's still very much a small town diner that caters to local clients and not just TV nerds. But it's really cool to have a local business that leans into that to make the fan experience so special.
Those in the community that actually had to deal with the original film crew don't have positive memories about Twin Peaks. But I remember I was about 6 years old, and my mom had gone down to pick me up from elementary school, probably kindergarten or something. And my little sister was in the car with us, and they closed our road so we couldn't go home for about 2 hours. And so we were stuck, because it was a one-way road, waiting for the film crew to be done so we could go home. And my little sister got impatient because we'd been waiting for about an hour, and it was past her nap time. And while my mom was talking to the security guards about how long it was going to take to let us through, she honked the horn, and the assistant director came out and yelled at her. And so that's what my one memory of the filming of Twin Peaks is, being a child and seeing my little sister get yelled at by an adult for something that was the adult's fault, not the poor toddler who was ready to go home and have their nap. I don't think it was unrealistic to let a car through over an hour period of time between shots. And that's not the choice they made. They made the choice to come out and yell at a little kid.
My hope is that locals don't find us to be intrusive or a hassle. I hope what they are able to take away from Twin Peaks is seeing their community in a different light. I'm sure it's really strange to see nerds like me taking pictures of an empty field where a trailer park used to be. But I hope that maybe if locals who don't quite get it see us experiencing the magic of this place, that maybe it will help them see, not that they need help seeing that this is a beautiful place, but there's Twin Peaks magic, and maybe experiencing that through someone else's eyes would be a new experience for someone who's lived here for a long time.
I think some people sometimes will have a misunderstanding about Snoqualmie Valley because they just kind of think there should be more Twin Peaks stuff, and they don't understand that a sign in the sign location just doesn't work because people steal it / vandalize it. All the things. We feel bad. We wish we could have one. Plus, it's in unincorporated King County. It's literally not in either city or town.
The town definitely embraces the show, but I think there is a bit of projection on it from fans who have never been here. Because obviously, if you see it on the screen, you know, you're seeing the color graded version. You're seeing the sort of romanticized Twin Peaks version of the town. So of course, it's not going to be exactly this dream world that David Lynch and Mark Frost and everybody has created. But in a way, it's even more beautiful than in the show because it's real. It's tangible. You can be here. You can live it. You can be inside it. And I want to give my thanks to David Lynch and Mark Frost for making it so beautiful in the show in order to get people out here to really experience it.
I'm sure there are people who don't see it beyond its pop culture status, but if you take the time to soak in the space and get to know the real people here and, you know, the business owners and the actual dynamic of the town, it's a lot more than a pop culture landmark.
They're missing what the valley actually is. It's a cool show, but it could be set in any community and be not an actual reflection of it. I don't actually think Twin Peaks was a reflection of the valley at all, other than it has our scenery in it.
I think Twin Peaks will have at least some type of resonance in perpetuity, because it was a really unique, groundbreaking show, and it impacted a lot of people in really deep ways, very powerful ways. It really impacts people that way. And it's amazing to see, you know, because we have the old fans, the day one fans, they've been watching the show since it came out, but it's also fantastic to see a younger generation start to get involved with that as well, which I'm seeing a lot of. And because it's a timeless sort of tale, you know, and David Lynch just did it in such an interesting way that it will continue to resonate. And I hope it does, because I think it's really cool. And I like Evan. People come out and visit our town because of it.
In my opinion, anyone who is a Lynch fan is kind of one for life, because that's kind of how I feel. And with something like Twin Peaks, it was just such a new thing. And now with social media and everything else, I think there's also just a resurgence recently with David Lynch passing that, I mean, last year, so many people just showed up kind of last minute too. And it's so different and so unique and so amazing that's why it just is kind of going to last a stat of time. I mean, it's just going to go. Everyone's going to be, whoever's been a fan now, they're going to legit take it to the grave.
I think as long as there is a desire to solve mysteries, I think David Lynch's work and Mark Frost's, you know, with the show, but obviously David Lynch's films and that sort of thing, they leave a lot of ambiguity and they leave a lot of questions to be answered. And even though I've been studying this and I've researched this, I mean, again, it's hundreds of film locations, it's props, it's details about the production and so forth. I'm still discovering things all these years later. I'm still finding new things to solve. Things I've always heard that, you know, happen, but did they really happen? You know, and trying to get to the bottom of mysteries and solving that. And I think that's what Twin Peaks does well, is it presents a mystery, but it packages it in a way that feels accessible, that it does leave open for interpretation. I think the fan community has created an environment where they're accepting, you know, you can have your thoughts about whatever the show means, whatever it is, but it doesn't mean you're right or I'm right. We're both right. It's art, I think, at the end of the day. And I think as long as you have an appreciation of art, which I think is what David Lynch's works holistically are, is he's an artist at first. He just liked to make moving pictures, you know, but he's a painter. I mean, he enjoyed painting. The films became a moving picture from that. As long as you have that sense of appreciation of art and in a picturesque setting, which is here in Snoqualmie Valley, I think you're always going to have, when you come out and again, someone who lives in Central Florida, we have palm trees and we have a lot of flat land, and you come out here and, you know, to paraphrase Agent Cooper, what kind of fantastic trees do you have out here? To see the wonder of these massive trees and these mountains that are just so majestic, the foothills of the Cascades, to see it in snow, the snow-covered mountains. It is, I think that sense of wonder will always drive people here. And if they find it through the story of Twin Peaks, great. You know, if they just found it here and come out and find it from that, and then later discover Twin Peaks, like, oh, I visited that place, great. And I think great directors, you know, if you think about the greats over time, Stanley Kubrick's another famous one, Alfred Hitchcock's another one that I enjoy. Decades later, they're still being debated, they're still being discussed, and I think as long as that continues, and as long as the Valley will have everybody come out here and experience the real Twin Peaks, I think it'll live on.
I think Twin Peaks is just a timeless piece of art. It blends aesthetics from these different eras, so even though more than 30 years has passed, it still doesn't feel as dated as its peers do. And it's that blending of aesthetics is, for lack of a better word, dreamy. And it's just easy to exist in that space. So even though the show covers some really dark subject matter, it's also a comfort show for a lot of people. And some of it is absurd and some of it is tender, but it's a space that I don't get tired of being in. I don't think a thing like that really ages. On every watching, I find something new. Steven and I on Twin Peaks blog, we are watching the background more than anything at this point. We know the dialogue, we know the scenes, and these little details and the props and the set dressing just add a whole other layer of things to appreciate that anchor Twin Peaks in reality. At this point in the way media is consumed, there's more than one way to take in a piece of art. And you have people who are seeing Twin Peaks for the first time via Mubi, or people who found it in the DVD era, people who have seen a meme of Dale Cooper or something and followed that down the rabbit hole. So as much as this was a phenomenon of the 1990s, it's still finding a new audience, and there are generations of people who find different things to appreciate in it, and I think that's a sign of a very well-rounded piece of art.
It's important for people to realize that these are real places, and that there's a lot of sense of history to them, and that they're just, the businesses that are here today are stewards of a time, right? And they're in this moment from this. And I think as long as people realize that people are living here, that these are places that they go, and that we acknowledge that the Snoqualmie tribe has been here forever, that this is just a moment in time, and that this is a much larger picture, I think, at the end of the day, around the places that we visit in Snoqualmie Valley, the places we step into these worlds. And I always I wanted to at least present that on Twin Peaks blog about the stories behind them, right? And the people behind them, because I think as time passes, those stories get lost, and the memories of the people just kind of get lost, from that. And so if there's some way to keep that alive, I hope people just acknowledge and patron things like the Snoqualmie Valley Historical Museum, or come out to these fan events where you can hear from people that live here and work here and all that kind of stuff. I think that just as long as you remember them, they'll always live on. And I hope that people just remember that.